The military prosecutor's voice echoed through the court-martial chamber as he read the charges: treason, espionage, and betrayal of the United States of America. Major Katherine Price sat in the defendant's chair, her uniform stripped of rank insignia, facing a life sentence for crimes she allegedly committed while serving overseas. The evidence seemed overwhelming, the witnesses credible, and her guilt apparent to everyone in that room. But what nobody knew, not the judge, not the jury, not even her own defense attorney, was that Katherine Price had actually spent the last 15 years risking her life in the deepest, most classified CIA operation in American history. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of those who serve in ways that can never be publicly acknowledged, sacrificing not just their lives but their reputations for national security. The court-martial chamber at Fort Meade was designed to project the authority and dignity of military justice. Dark wood paneling rose to cathedral ceilings, while the American flag and Army colors flanked the judge's bench in a display of institutional power that had witnessed decades of military trials. Today, it would host what many considered the most serious case of treason in modern Army history. Major Katherine Price sat at the defendant's table wearing Army dress blues, stripped of rank insignia and unit patches, the visible symbols of 15 years of military service removed as if her career had never existed. At 37, she maintained the rigid posture that had been drilled into her at West Point, but her eyes carried a weight that spoke of experiences far beyond normal military service. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Military personnel from across the base had come to witness the fall of an officer who'd once been considered a rising star in Army intelligence. Journalists from military publications sat alongside federal investigators who'd spent months building the case against her. And in the front row, Katherine's parents watched their daughter face charges that could result in execution. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the military prosecutor, had built his career on high-profile conviction. His opening statement laid out evidence that appeared to leave no room for reasonable doubt: classified documents found in Katherine's possession, unauthorized contact with foreign intelligence services, and financial transactions that suggested she'd been selling American secrets to hostile nations. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Harrison said, his voice carrying the confident authority of someone who'd never lost a case this significant, "the evidence will show that Major Katherine Price systematically betrayed every oath she took as an officer and a soldier. She sold out her country, her unit, and her fellow soldiers for money." Katherine's defense attorney, Captain Maria Rodriguez, was a recent law school graduate who'd been assigned the case despite her lack of experience with treason trials. She'd spent weeks trying to build a defense around procedural violations and questionable evidence collection, but privately she believed her client was guilty of the charges. The prosecution's case unfolded with methodical precision over 3 days of testimony. Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division presented evidence of Katherine's contact with known foreign operatives. Financial investigators traced payments of over $300,000 to offshore accounts in Katherine's name. Fellow soldiers testified about her suspicious behavior during deployments to Afghanistan and Syria. Most damning was the testimony of Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, Katherine's former intelligence analyst, who described witnessing her photograph classified documents and transmit encrypted communications to unauthorized recipients. "She thought nobody was watching," Torres testified, his voice barely concealing his disgust at what he'd seen. "But I saw her copy files that contained information about ongoing operations, troop movements, and intelligence assets. People died because of what she did." Katherine listened to each piece of evidence with the same stoic expression she'd maintained throughout the trial. She didn't react when prosecutors described her alleged betrayals, didn't flinch when witnesses portrayed her as a traitor, and didn't speak except to confirm her understanding of the proceeding. Her silence frustrated Captain Rodriguez, who'd begged her client to provide some explanation for the evidence against her. "Katherine, I can't defend you if you won't tell me what really happened," she'd said during one of their preparation sessions. "The evidence is overwhelming. If there's another explanation, I need to know what it is." Katherine's response had been the same answer she'd given to every question about her alleged crimes: "I cannot discuss operational details." By the end of the prosecution's case, conviction seemed inevitable. The evidence was substantial, the witnesses credible, and the defendant's refusal to explain her actions appeared to confirm her guilt. Military legal experts following the trial predicted a guilty verdict, followed by a sentence that would likely include life imprisonment and possible execution. But what none of them knew was that Katherine Price's trial was being monitored by people whose existence was known only to a handful of individuals at the highest levels of American intelligence. 3 blocks away from the Fort Meade courthouse, CIA Deputy Director Margaret Williams sat in a secure conference room reviewing classified files that painted a completely different picture of the woman being tried for treason. According to the documents spread across her desk, Major Katherine Price wasn't a traitor. She was one of the most successful deep-cover operatives in CIA history. For 15 years, Katherine had lived a double life that required her to appear to betray her country while actually protecting it. Her unauthorized contact with foreign agents had been part of a complex infiltration operation that had identified terrorist networks across 3 continents. The classified documents found in her possession had been part of an elaborate deception designed to feed false information to America's enemies, and the financial transactions that seemed to indicate treason were actually funding mechanisms for an operation that had prevented at least 12 major terrorist attacks. The problem was that Operation Deep Mirror was classified at levels that exceeded the security clearance of everyone involved in Katherine's court-martial. The military judge, the prosecutors, the defense attorney, and even the general convening the court-martial had no legal authority to know about the operation that explained Katherine's apparent crimes. Margaret Williams faced an impossible choice: reveal one of America's most successful intelligence operations to save Katherine Price's life, or allow a patriotic soldier to be convicted of treason to protect national security. The decision would determine not just Katherine's fate, but the future of American intelligence operations around the world. Operation Deep Mirror had begun in 2008 with a simple premise: America's enemies had become too sophisticated to be penetrated by traditional intelligence methods. Terrorist networks, hostile nations, and criminal organizations had learned to identify and neutralize conventional CIA operatives through counter-surveillance techniques that made normal espionage operations ineffective. The solution was radical: create deep-cover operatives who would appear to betray their own country while actually serving it. These agents would establish authentic relationships with America's enemies by seemingly providing genuine intelligence and demonstrating real hostility toward U.S. interests. Only after years of building trust would they be positioned to gather the kind of intelligence that could save American lives. Katherine Price had been selected for the program while still a cadet at West Point. Her psychological profile indicated the kind of mental resilience necessary to maintain a double identity under extreme stress. Her academic performance demonstrated the intellectual capability required to manage complex deception operations, and her personal history showed the patriotic commitment necessary to endure years of apparent dishonor for the greater good. The program required her to sacrifice everything that most soldiers valued: recognition for her service, respect from her peers, and the knowledge that her country appreciated her sacrifice. Instead, she would appear to be everything the military despised: a traitor, a sellout, and a betrayer of the oath she'd sworn to uphold. Her first assignment had taken her to Afghanistan, where she was tasked with infiltrating Taliban networks by appearing to provide intelligence about American operations. The information she passed was carefully crafted by CIA analysts to seem valuable while actually containing subtle deceptions that led Taliban forces into American ambushes. Over 3 years in Afghanistan, Katherine's apparent betrayals helped identify over 200 Taliban operatives, located weapons caches that were subsequently destroyed, and provided intelligence that prevented 14 planned attacks on American bases. But to maintain her cover, she had to appear increasingly hostile to American interests, a performance that earned her the suspicion and contempt of fellow soldiers who had no idea she was saving their lives. Her second deployment took her to Syria, where she infiltrated Iranian intelligence networks by appearing to provide classified information about American positions and planned operations. Again, the intelligence was carefully designed to deceive while appearing authentic. Iranian forces, acting on Katherine's leaked information, repeatedly found themselves attacking empty positions, while American forces struck their actual targets. The Syrian operation was Katherine's most successful and most dangerous assignment. For 2 years, she lived as a double agent whose apparent treason became so convincing that even American intelligence officers who weren't cleared for Operation Deep Mirror began investigating her for actual crimes. The investigation created a crisis that threatened to expose the entire operation. Katherine's handlers at CIA were forced to provide enough genuine intelligence to satisfy Iranian contacts, while ensuring that no real damage was done to American interests. The psychological pressure of appearing to betray her country while actually protecting it pushed Katherine to the edge of a breakdown that required extensive psychological support, but the results justified the risk. Katherine's Syrian operation identified Iranian weapons smuggling routes that were subsequently interdicted, located chemical weapons facilities that were destroyed by Israeli airstrikes, and provided intelligence that helped free American prisoners held by Iranian-backed militia. Most importantly, her work in Syria uncovered a planned terrorist attack on the United States that would have killed thousands of civilians. Iranian intelligence, believing Katherine was a genuine asset, had shared details of the operation as proof of their trust in her apparent commitment to harming American interests. Katherine had passed the intelligence to her CIA handlers, who coordinated with FBI counterterrorism teams to arrest the terrorist cell before they could execute their attack. The arrests were attributed to routine surveillance, protecting Katherine's cover while saving American lives. By 2023, Katherine Price had become one of the CIA's most valuable assets, trusted by terrorist networks and hostile intelligence services who believed she was a dedicated traitor willing to sell out her own country for money and ideology. Her apparent crimes had actually prevented dozens of attacks, identified hundreds of enemies, and saved thousands of American lives. But the psychological cost had been enormous. 15 years of appearing to betray everything she believed in had taken a toll that no amount of training could have prepared her for. Katherine suffered from depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress that came not from combat trauma but from the constant psychological strain of living as someone she despised. Her CIA handlers recognized that the operation couldn't continue indefinitely. Plans were being developed to extract Katherine from her deep cover role and transition her to a new identity that would allow her to disappear from both her enemies and her apparent crime. Those plans were shattered when Army counterintelligence, operating without knowledge of Operation Deep Mirror, arrested Katherine for the very crimes that had been central to her mission. Her carefully constructed cover as a traitor had become so convincing that it fooled American investigators who were doing their jobs by investigating suspected treason. Now Katherine sat in a military courtroom facing execution for crimes that were actually acts of heroism, protected by classification levels that prevented anyone from explaining the truth about her service. And CIA Deputy Director Margaret Williams had less than 24 hours to decide whether to sacrifice America's most successful intelligence operation to save the life of its most dedicated operative. The secure phone in Margaret Williams' office rang at 6:43 a.m. with the kind of encrypted call that indicated a crisis at the highest levels of American intelligence. The voice on the other end belonged to Director of National Intelligence Robert Hayes, whose calm tone couldn't disguise the urgency of the situation. "Margaret, we have a decision to make about Operation Deep Mirror," Hayes said without preamble. Katherine Price's court-martial resumes in 3 hours, and the jury is expected to begin deliberations by this afternoon. Williams had been anticipating this call since Katherine's arrest 6 months ago. "Sir, revealing the operation would compromise 15 years of intelligence work and endanger assets we still have in the field, and allowing Katherine to be convicted would mean executing one of our most effective operatives for successfully completing her mission," Hayes replied. "The President is aware of the situation. He's authorized us to take whatever action is necessary to prevent a miscarriage of justice." Williams understood the implications. Presidential authorization meant that national security considerations outweighed operational security. Katherine Price would be saved, but Operation Deep Mirror would be exposed, potentially ending the careers and endangering the lives of other deep cover operatives around the world. "Who has the authority to intervene in the court-martial?" Williams asked. As DNI, I can present classified evidence to the convening authority and request dismissal of charges based on national security grounds, but it has to happen before the jury reaches a verdict." Williams checked her watch. The court-martial was scheduled to resume at 9 a.m. with closing arguments, followed by jury deliberation. If they were going to act, it had to be now. "Sir, I recommend we proceed with the intervention. Katherine Price has served her country with distinction under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. She deserves better than execution for crimes that were actually acts of heroism." "Agreed. I'm sending a team to Fort Meade now, with the necessary authorization and documentation." This conversation never happened, and Operation Deep Mirror never existed in any public record. At 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Katherine Price's court-martial was scheduled to resume, 2 black SUVs arrived at the Fort Meade courthouse. The men who emerged carried briefcases containing documents that would change the trajectory of one of the most serious treason trials in military history. Director of National Intelligence Robert Hayes entered the courthouse with the kind of federal authority that made military protocol bend to accommodate his presence. He was accompanied by CIA Deputy Director Williams and a legal team specializing in classified evidence procedure. The meeting with Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the convening authority for Katherine's court-martial, took place in her secure conference room, with only the officials who possessed the necessary security clearances to discuss Operation Deep Mirror. Colonel Mitchell, Hayes began, "I'm here to inform you that Major Katherine Price's alleged crimes were actually part of a classified intelligence operation conducted under direct presidential authority. She is not a traitor, she is one of our most valuable intelligence assets." Colonel Mitchell, a 25-year veteran of military law, had never encountered a situation where national intelligence leadership intervened in an active court-martial. "Sir, with respect, I need to see documentation before I can consider dismissing charges that have already been presented to a jury." Hayes opened his briefcase and presented a folder marked with classification stamps that Colonel Mitchell recognized as exceeding her own security clearance. These documents detail Major Price's actual role in Operation Deep Mirror, a 15-year intelligence operation that has prevented dozens of terrorist attacks and saved thousands of American lives. The documentation was overwhelming. Presidential findings authorizing the operation, CIA operational reports detailing Katherine's actual activities, intelligence assessments showing the strategic value of her apparent betrayals, and performance evaluations describing her as one of the most effective operatives in American intelligence history. Colonel Williams added, "Major Price has endured 15 years of appearing to betray her country while actually protecting it. Her apparent crimes were carefully orchestrated deceptions designed to infiltrate America's enemy. The evidence against her is genuine because it had to be genuine to maintain her cover." Colonel Mitchell reviewed the classified documents with the careful attention of someone who understood that her decision would affect not just Katherine's life, but the integrity of American intelligence operation. After 40 minutes of reading, she looked up at the intelligence officials with an expression of profound respect and regret. "Gentlemen, this changes everything. Major Price isn't guilty of treason, she's guilty of extraordinary heroism under impossible circumstances." Hayes nodded gravely. "Colonel, we need your help to correct this injustice without compromising ongoing operations. Can the charges be dismissed on national security grounds without revealing the specific details of her service?" "Yes, I have the authority to dismiss charges when their prosecution would compromise classified operations. The court will be told that new evidence has emerged that exonerates Major Price, but the details will remain classified." At 9:15 a.m., Colonel Mitchell entered the court-martial chamber and made an announcement that stunned everyone present. "Due to the emergence of classified evidence that bears directly on this case, all charges against Major Katherine Price are hereby dismissed. This court-martial is concluded." The reaction was immediate and confused. Prosecutors demanded explanations. Defense counsel asked for clarification. Journalists shouted questions that couldn't be answered. But Katherine Price simply stood at attention as Colonel Mitchell approached her with something that hadn't been seen in that courtroom for 6 months. "Major Price," the colonel said quietly, "on behalf of the United States Army and the American people, I want to apologize for what you've endured. Your service to this country has been extraordinary, and your sacrifices will not be forgotten by those who are authorized to remember them." Katherine's response was the first words she'd spoken during the entire trial beyond procedural acknowledgments. "Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing my job." As Katherine was escorted from the courthouse by CIA security personnel, she disappeared into the same shadows where she'd served for 15 years. Her official military record would show an honorable discharge with classified service, notations that prevented further inquiry. The public would never know that the woman they'd seen tried for treason was actually one of America's greatest heroes. Her story would remain buried in classified files that might never be declassified. But Katherine Price would finally be free to live as herself, no longer required to appear to be someone she despised. After 15 years of sacrificing her reputation for her country's security, she could finally reclaim her honor. Some heroes receive medals and parades. Others receive only the quiet knowledge that they've served something greater than themselves. Katherine Price had earned something rarer than recognition, the certainty that her sacrifices had meaning, even if that meaning could never be publicly acknowledged. 3 months later, Katherine Price began work as a private security consultant, her new identity protected by the same classification levels that had once made her appear to be a traitor. Her clients would never know they were being protected by someone who'd spent 15 years infiltrating America's enemies. And in secure facilities around the world, other deep cover operatives, continued the kind of work that required them to appear to betray everything they actually serve, because some missions require heroes who can never be recognized as heroes, and some patriots prove their love of country by appearing to hate it. Katherine Price's trial had ended, but her real honor was just beginning.